was a therapist for a decade, addiction and mental health. And I never got burnt out at all in the work. I love the work, but I got burnt out on the leadership. And that's not to say someone was a good person or a bad person. It's just not-for-profits don't always have strong leadership. And I just happened to have 3 kind of doozy leaders in a row where I was like, whew,
It's a lot.
It's a lot. I'm ready for my next thing. And I went into executive coaching. And I was in a company for a long time, about 5 years, that I just, looking back, if I knew what I knew now, it would be a 2-year gig. I'd come in, I'd learn everything I needed to know, I'd get all the data, I'd get everything I needed, and then boom, I'd go launch a company. But instead, I'm a punk, right? So I'm like, hey, like, how do we make this better? How do we work together? And also, I'm a punk, so I'm like obnoxious about it, and like,
Right.
smart, like acting like I'm the smartest person in the room, or I'm like the moral, I've got the moral high ground on everyone.
Of course.
So it's like about 5.5 years, they're sick of me, I'm sick of them, right? We part ways. I start my own company. And day one, I start the company, I call a bunch of people, instantly got clients because they knew me for my work, not for the company I'd been, they knew me for the work that I do. But when they started drawing me into bigger organizations, that people kept saying to me, well, you're not like a normal coach. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? They're like, well, you're like a therapist almost. I'm like, well, I am a therapist.
Yeah,
and
hence my background.
Right. When people are like, oh, I didn't know that. And I was like, we're not here doing therapy. Like, we're not doing like traditional therapy, but we're doing a lot of psychology of leadership. And you need someone who's very comfortable having difficult conversations and being in that space, has a lot of knowledge, but doesn't phrase it in complex ways, so that you feel that you're just having a business conversation, but they can utilize that background. And they're like, well, how come there aren't more therapists doing this? I'm like, well, I'm also a punk. So like, I'm not afraid to take a leap and do something. And the reason that Cadence was successful right off the bat was because I was an end user. Like, I had been a therapist, but I'd also been in therapy. I grew up in a scene that was all about being vulnerable and being honest and doing things kind of like do it yourself, but also they are businesses. I basically had all the training I needed to do to have Cadence just by living life and having a professional career. And one of the things that I really hope that people get out of this is like, whatever your career is now, whatever you do, it's got an application to whatever you do next, even if it is dynamically different, like so much different. And it's like all of who you are matters to the next thing. And when you say that sales, like, oh, like we're thinking about sales, like, oh, sales?
Totally.
When I had to do sales for the company that I worked at beforehand that I did not believe in, I was like, sales. But I believed in helping people. So I could do it. But when I got into doing sales at Cadence, which I do now, it's like, oh, this is so that I can pay everyone a living wage. Not just a living wage, a wage where they can like support themselves and their families and own homes or do like live life, go on vacations. It's so that we have bigger reach. It's so that I can support my family and we can have a good quality of life. It's so that we can do something meaningful in the world. And sales wasn't sales. Like at the company I was at before, it was like, I'm making this guy that I think is a jerk rich. And I do believe in what I do, but I don't believe in the mission of this company. But then for my company, it was like, I believe in this. It's an extension of my thinking. I think we've got something that's valuable. I love my family. I love my friends. I want to help everyone. I want to do something cool. And now sales aren't like sales. No. Sales are like, oh, of course we do that because that's how we help. That's how we do things. How I help you. That's how you help me. That's how we help each other. And like these ideas that sound cringy or these roles that sound cringy, if you just are working in the right place at the right time, they open up a whole different way of thinking.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. And it really, it goes to the core of not only who you are as a person, but then just the idea of attaching yourself to something that you find valuable. And that's where people can find success in whatever it is that they're applying themselves to and I know that this statement has been uttered towards you many times where it's like, bring your whole self to work. And just that idea where it's just like, yeah, like that's not always true because you shouldn't bring certain things to work from a professional perspective. But like when you are bringing as much of yourself as it makes logical sense to do, that's beautiful because then people are knowing that you're an actual human being. You're not just a dumb email address asking them for something. You're just like, no, if I'm like, we can probably be successful doing this thing together. I'm not just trying to pitch you something for pitching you something's sake, even though there's an element of that. But like, yeah, you really learn about the best ways to not only approach people to obviously get you to the end result that, makes you successful, but then in turn not be a terrible person back to them, where it's just like, oh yeah, like, just again, transactional. Like I can't, I really, I prickle at that. Like the moment I see people doing that towards me, I'm just like, okay, like this isn't going to work. Like we're not going to be here.
Around bringing your whole self to work, I'm going to quote the always amazing Andy Norton. Fucking ooh, man.
Yeah.
Like,
dude, it's awful. It's so awful.
Like I am a believer in like bringing your whole self, like being who you are,
Exactly.
but being the heightened version. So it's like what I say, like the high self and the low self.
Yep.
So when I go to a wedding, like I don't show up in pajamas.
Of course.
Or sweatpants, whatever.
Yeah.
I prefer to wear pajamas. Well, not pajamas. I prefer to wear like sweatpants or shorts or be comfortable.
Yep.
But if I'm going to someone's wedding and they're having like a nice wedding, I know I'm going to wear a suit.
Right.
And when I'm in a suit, I feel good. You know, I'm like, this feels good. It's nice. Go to the wedding, you have fun, you take off your jacket, you have a good time, right?
Yep.
But that, like, if you were to say to me, Aram, do you want to wear a suit when you're sitting at home with your wife watching TV? I'd be like, no, that's crazy.
Awful.
It's also crazy to me to go to a wedding not wearing the appropriate attire. The idea is like the high self versus the low self. It's like being the high self is meeting the needs of the situation appropriately. And it's still me in the suit going to the wedding. It's all of me, but I am showing the version of myself or putting together the version of myself that's appropriate for that moment and moving with the flow of the conversation and the flow of the night. To not do that, I think, is an ultra selfish, narcissistic thing of just being like, this is exactly who I am. And bringing my whole self to work is the most important thing. So everyone else needs to put up with it. It's like, that actually sounds like moderately abusive. I feel that's like, bring your best self to work and move with the flow. If someone else is doing something objectionable, state your need, hold your boundaries, do those things, but also make space for others to do that with you. So bring your whole self to work, but to go again to Andy Norton, fucking you, man. Like
totally. Read the room.
Don't be gross. Like just don't bring all that other stuff.
Totally. Don't be a bull in a china shop. Yeah, definitely understand what you need to bring to the table in order to obviously be a respectable human being in whatever situation you're walking into.